Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. Highway 191 cuts through the heart of Navajo Nation, a stretch of asphalt that has witnessed more than its share of unexplained phenomena. The calls that come across the police dispatchers' radios tell stories that defy conventional explanation. These are the official recordings, the documented encounters, and the lingering questions from one of America's most mysterious highways. The Navajo people have long spoken of entities that walk between worlds. But what happens when these ancient encounters intersect with modern law enforcement? The recordings we'll examine tonight have been verified through multiple sources, yet remain unexplained by conventional investigation. From the desolate stretches between Window Rock and Ganado to the winding roads near Chinle, Highway 191 has become a corridor of strange reports and disturbing calls. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late November of 2016. Dispatcher Eleanor Yazzie had worked the Navajo Nation police emergency line for 7 years, becoming accustomed to the rhythm of calls that came through the night. The reservation stretched across vast, sparsely populated territory, and Highway 191 served as its primary artery. Eleanor knew every mile marker, every community, and every response unit by heart. Her shift began at 10 p.m., as usual, with the familiar hum of computer servers and the quiet chatter of officers conducting routine patrols. The night was unseasonably cold for the high desert, with temperatures already dropping into the 30s as darkness fell across the rugged landscape. The first unusual call came at 11:47 p.m. Eleanor was logging a routine traffic stop when another line flashed on her console. She switched channels, her fingers automatically reaching for the record button. Navajo Nation Police. What is your emergency? The voice that answered was breathless, strained. Something's chasing me, the caller said, on Highway 191 just past the turnoff to Crystal. Eleanor could hear the sound of a car engine straining, tires skidding on pavement. Sir, can you describe what's chasing you? She asked, her voice maintaining its professional calm. It's not human, the man replied, his words punctuated by heavy breathing. It's running alongside my car. I've never seen anything move like this. Eleanor noted the time in her log. 11:49 p.m. As the call continued, the man described something moving with impossible speed, keeping pace with his vehicle despite his acceleration to over 80 miles per hour. It's dark, he said, but when the headlights hit it, it's tall, too tall. The proportions are wrong. Eleanor could hear a rhythmic thudding sound, as if something was striking the side of his vehicle. Sir, I need you to remain calm, she said. I'm dispatching Officer Begay to your location. The dispatcher typed rapidly, sending the nearest unit to mile marker 447 on Highway 191. It's trying to get in front of me, the caller said, his voice rising with panic. The headlights keep catching it. It doesn't have a face. Eleanor heard a loud crash, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Then silence. Officer Daniel Begay arrived at the scene 12 minutes later. He found a single vehicle overturned in the ditch, its driver's side window completely shattered. The driver, a 34-year-old man named Thomas Nakai, was unconscious but breathing. There were no other vehicles on the road, and despite a thorough search of the surrounding area, Officer Begay found no footprints or tracks in the dusty soil besides his own. The incident report noted extensive damage to the driver's side of the vehicle. with deep scratches that appeared to have been made by something with considerable strength. When questioned later, Nakai remembered little beyond the feeling of being pursued and the sight of something impossibly tall moving alongside his car. The official report listed the cause of the accident as driver swerved to avoid unknown animal. But Eleanor kept the original recording, marked as Case File 16-1191-47. She would listen to it many times in the coming months, always wondering what had made those sounds on the edge of Highway 191 that November night. Hundreds of miles away, another driver was about to discover that Highway 191 could bend time itself. It was early March of 2018 when long-haul trucker Miguel Rodriguez picked up a load in Flagstaff destined for a distribution center in Gallup. The route required him to cut through the eastern portion of Navajo Nation via Highway 191, a stretch he'd driven dozens of times over his 20-year career. Rodriguez was a methodical man who kept meticulous logs, never missing a mile marker or fuel stop. That Tuesday morning began like any other, with the desert sun just beginning to crest the horizon as he approached the reservation boundary. The temperature was already rising, promising another unseasonably warm day in the high desert. Rodriguez crossed into Navajo Nation at approximately 6:15 a.m., noting the time in his logbook as he passed the welcome sign. The road ahead stretched straight and empty, cutting through a landscape of red rock and sagebrush. He was making good time, his 18-wheeler humming along at 65 miles per hour. The radio played softly in the cab, a classic rock station from Flagstaff that would soon fade to static as he drove deeper into the reservation's remote territory. Around 7:30 a.m., as he approached the turnoff for the small community of Ganado, Rodriguez noticed something unusual on the horizon. A shimmering distortion, like heat haze, though the morning was still cool. He attributed it to a trick of the light and continued driving, maintaining his steady pace. The next thing Rodriguez remembered was the sudden jolt of his truck's air brakes engaging automatically. He blinked, disoriented, realizing he was slowing to a stop on the shoulder of Highway 191. The sun was now high in the sky, far higher than it should have been. He checked his watch. 11:42 a.m. Nearly 4.5 hours had passed in what felt like moments. His logbook showed no entries after 7:30 a.m., though he had apparently covered over 200 miles of highway in that missing time. Rodriguez felt a strange disorientation, as if waking from a deep sleep. His truck was undamaged, the fuel gauge showed normal consumption for the distance traveled, and there was no sign of any mechanical issue. Yet something fundamental had shifted during those lost hours. When Rodriguez called his dispatcher to report his status, the man on the other end sounded confused. "Miguel, we've been trying to reach you for hours," he said. "You missed your scheduled check-in at 9 a.m. Rodriguez had no memory of any such call. Later, when he reviewed his truck's GPS data, he discovered something even more disturbing. The tracking system showed his vehicle had been stationary for nearly 3 hours at mile marker 463, though he had no recollection of stopping. The data indicated the engine had been running, but the truck hadn't moved during that time. Rodriguez returned to that spot on his next trip, north, finding nothing remarkable about the location. Just a straight stretch of highway surrounded by desert scrub and distant mesas. He never spoke of the incident to anyone besides his wife, who noted that her husband seemed different after that day, quieter, more prone to staring into the distance, as if listening for something she couldn't hear. The official explanation remained a simple notation in his file. Possible fatigue-related microsleep incident. But Rodriguez knew that something far stranger had occurred on that stretch of Highway 191. It was just after midnight on a cold January night in 2019. Officer Charlene Johnson was conducting her routine patrol along Highway 191 when her spotlight caught something unusual on the shoulder near mile marker 389. A late-model sedan sat parked at an odd angle, its headlights still cutting through the darkness. Johnson pulled her patrol car behind the vehicle, noting that the engine was still running, but no one appeared to be inside. She approached cautiously, flashlight beams sweeping across the empty seats and half-open driver's side door. The keys were in the ignition, a cell phone lay on the passenger seat, and a steaming cup of coffee sat in the center console. Everything suggested the driver had stepped away momentarily, yet there was no sign of anyone in the surrounding darkness. Johnson called in the vehicle's license plate, learning it belonged to a 42-year-old woman from Shiprock who had been reported missing by her husband 6 hours earlier. The woman, a teacher named Sarah Bigay, had been driving home from a faculty meeting in Window Rock when she disappeared. Johnson secured the scene and requested backup, knowing that Highway 191 had a reputation for strange occurrences that required more than standard procedure. As she waited for other officers to arrive, she conducted a preliminary search of the immediate area, finding nothing but desert scrub and the faint outline of the Chaska Mountains in the distance. The night was unnaturally quiet, with no sound of insects or animals that typically populated the high desert after dark. When backup arrived, the officers conducted a more thorough search of the area, expanding their radius to include the rugged terrain on both sides of the highway. They found no footprints, no signs of struggle, and no indication where the missing woman might have gone. The only unusual detail was a series of strange marks in the dirt about 50 yards from the vehicle. Circular impressions arranged in a pattern that none of the officers could identify. They photographed the markings, but found no tracks leading to or from them, as if whatever had made them had appeared and vanished without disturbing the surrounding soil. The case file notes that Officer Johnson described feeling an unusual sense of being watched during the search, though she could identify no specific source for this feeling. Sarah Bigay was never found. Her disappearance became one of several similar cases along Highway 191, where vehicles were discovered abandoned with their engines still running, personal belongings left behind, and no trace of their occupants. The Navajo Nation Police Department eventually created a special classification for these incidents: Highway 191 abandonments. To date, 7 such cases remain open, with explanations ranging from abduction to voluntary disappearance. Yet those who investigate these cases speak quietly of patterns that suggest something beyond conventional understanding. Vehicles always found facing east, personal items arranged in specific ways, and the same circular impressions discovered at increasing distances from the roadways. Officer Johnson, now a sergeant, still patrols that stretch of highway, though she admits she experiences a sense of unease whenever she approaches mile marker 389 after dark. The summer of 2020 brought record heat to the Four Corners region. The Mitchell family, John and Lisa, along with their 2 children, ages 8 and 11, were driving from Phoenix to Denver for a family reunion. Their route took them north on Highway 191 through the heart of Navajo Nation. It was mid-afternoon on a Saturday when their SUV began to overheat. John pulled to the shoulder just past the turnoff for Canyon to Shelley, steam rising from beneath the hood. The temperature gauge was in the red, and when John lifted the hood, he discovered a ruptured radiator hose. They were in a dead zone for cell service, with no other vehicles in sight. The family had water and snacks, but John knew they wouldn't last long in the 105-degree heat. As John worked to assess the damage, Lisa noticed something odd about the surrounding landscape. The desert seemed to shimmer in a way that didn't match the heat patterns she was familiar with. "The colors look wrong," she told her husband, pointing to the red rock formations nearby. "They're shifting." John dismissed it as a heat mirage, focusing instead on the mechanical problem. The children grew restless in the car, complaining of an unusual humming sound that only they could hear. "It's like a song," the 8-year-old said. "But it's sad." Lisa felt a growing sense of unease, though she couldn't identify its source. The silence of the desert felt different than she expected, too complete, as if even the insects had gone quiet. 2 hours passed as the family waited for help. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. It was then that Lisa noticed the first unusual phenomenon: a series of lights moving in formation across the distant horizon. They weren't aircraft. Their movement was too fluid, too synchronized. John, who had served in the Air Force, couldn't identify them either. "I've never seen anything like that," he admitted, shielding his eyes against the glare. The humming sound that only the children could hear grew louder, and now Lisa could detect it too. A low thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the soles of her shoes. The family huddled together as darkness fell, the SUV's interior lights casting a small circle of illumination in the growing gloom. The Mitchells were eventually rescued by a passing Navajo Nation police officer at approximately 9:30 p.m. When asked about their experience, they described a series of strange events that had occurred during their 5-hour ordeal. The shifting colors of the landscape, the mysterious lights, the humming sound that grew and receded without pattern, and an overwhelming sensation of being watched by something just beyond their range of vision. What they didn't mention to the officer, only discussing it weeks later with a researcher who specialized in unexplained phenomena, was the moment when all 4 family members simultaneously saw a figure standing on a nearby ridge. The figure was tall and unnaturally thin, its proportions wrong against the twilight sky. It remained visible for only seconds before vanishing without moving. The officer who rescued them noted in his report that the family seemed unusually shaken, though their vehicle showed no signs of tampering, and their story remained consistent throughout multiple interviews. The Mitchells completed their journey to Denver the next day, but they never again drove Highway 191, choosing instead to take a longer route when traveling through the Southwest. It was early October of 2017, and University of New Mexico graduate student Emily Torres was conducting field research for her thesis on ancestral Puebloan migration patterns. Her work required her to hike remote sections of Navajo Nation, documenting archaeological sites that had been previously recorded but not thoroughly studied. On this particular trip, she was exploring a series of petroglyphs near Highway 191, approximately 15 miles southeast of Chinle. Torres was an experienced hiker who had spent years conducting fieldwork in the Southwest. She knew the terrain, respected the elements, and always followed safety protocols. Her research advisor had received her last check-in call at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, during which she mentioned plans to hike to a remote site she had identified from aerial photographs. The search began when Torres failed to return to her designated pickup point by 6 p.m. that evening. Her rental car was found parked in a small pull-off near Highway 191, with her research equipment and water bottle still inside. The only items missing were her camera, notebook, and the day pack she always carried when conducting fieldwork. Navajo Nation search and rescue teams combed the area for 3 days, finding no sign of the missing researcher. The terrain was rugged, with deep canyons and steep cliffs that could easily conceal an injured person. Yet as the search continued, rescue workers began to notice some unusual details that didn't fit a typical lost hiker scenario. The first anomaly was discovered by search and rescue coordinator Thomas Wilson on the second day of the operation. In a remote canyon approximately 3 miles from Torres's vehicle, Wilson found a series of perfectly arranged stones, forming a spiral pattern approximately 20 feet in diameter. The arrangement was precise and deliberate, with each stone placed at exact intervals. What made this particularly strange was that Torres's research notes made no mention of such a formation, and it didn't appear on any previous archaeological surveys of the area. More disturbingly, the spiral showed no signs of aging, no weathering, no lichen growth, as if it had been placed there very recently. Wilson photographed the formation, but noted in his report that he felt an unusual sense of unease while examining it, as if being observed from the canyon walls above. The second discovery came on the third day of the search, when a team member found Torres's camera at the base of a cliff approximately 5 miles from her vehicle. The device was undamaged, but its memory card had been removed. A thorough search of the surrounding area yielded no sign of the missing card or Torres's notebook. The final strange discovery was made by a volunteer searcher who found a single footprint in a dry creek bed. A print that appeared to belong to Torres based on its size and the tread pattern of her hiking boots. What made this finding disturbing was that the print faced away from the direction of her vehicle, toward the most remote and inaccessible section of the search area. Beyond that single print, there were no other tracks. No approach, no departure. Just one isolated footprint in the center of the creek bed. Emily Torres was never found. Her case remains open with the Navajo Nation Police Department, listed as missing, circumstances unknown. What the official report doesn't detail are the strange stories that emerged from local residents during the search. Several people living near Highway 191 reported seeing unusual lights in the sky during the nights following Torres's disappearance. Others spoke of hearing strange chanting sounds carried on the wind, though no one could identify the source. Most disturbing was the account of an elderly woman who claimed to have seen Torres walking with a tall figure near the canyon where the stone spiral was found. When asked why she hadn't reported this earlier, the woman explained that she hadn't realized Torres was missing. She had assumed the researcher was being escorted by one of the medicine men who sometimes worked in that area. Yet when shown photographs of local medicine men, the woman shook her head. Whoever was with her, she said, was not human. It was well after midnight on a frigid February night in 2015. Deputy Samuel Tso had been with the Navajo Nation Police Department for 11 years, patrolling the same section of Highway 191 that his father had patrolled before him. The night was particularly cold, with temperatures hovering around 12 degrees and a thin layer of snow dusting the desert landscape. Tso was driving north, approaching the remote stretch between Lukachukai and Tieknos Pos, when his radio crackled to life. Unit 47, we have a 1057 report at mile marker 512, the dispatcher said, using the code for a strange light sighting. Multiple callers reporting unusual phenomena. Can you respond? Tso acknowledged the call, noting that such reports weren't uncommon in this area, though usually they came from tourists rather than local residents. When Tso arrived at the designated location, he found 3 vehicles parked on the shoulder, their occupants standing outside and pointing toward the western sky. Tso approached the group, recognizing 2 of the men as local ranchers and the third as a truck driver who frequently passed through the area. "What's going on, gentlemen?" Tso asked, his breath visible in the cold air. One of the ranchers pointed toward a mesa approximately 2 miles distant. "They started about an hour ago," he said. "Just lights, moving in ways that aircraft can't move." Tso followed the man's gaze, immediately seeing what had prompted the calls. A series of lights, too bright to be campfires, too mobile to be fixed structures, moved across the mesa and into the canyon beyond. Their movement was unlike any aircraft Tso had witnessed. Sudden vertical ascents, right-angled turns, and impossible speeds that left no sound. Tso radioed dispatch to report the phenomenon, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the unusual nature of what he was observing. "Dispatch, I can confirm multiple light sources in the vicinity of mile marker 5 and 12. Movement patterns do not correspond to known aircraft or natural phenomena. Requesting if any military operations are scheduled for this area. The response came back negative. No military operations, no authorized flights, no explanation for what Tso and the witnesses were seeing. For the next 40 minutes, Tso documented the lights with his dash camera and personal cell phone, occasionally switching to binoculars to get a better view. The lights appeared to communicate with each other through patterns of movement and color changes, pulsing from white to blue to red in sequences that seemed deliberate rather than random. The encounter took an unexpected turn when one of the lights separated from the others and began moving directly toward Highway 191. Tso estimated its speed at approximately 300 miles per hour, yet it made no sound and created no air disturbance. The other three witnesses grew nervous, with the truck driver suggesting they should leave. "Stay where you are," Tso advised, his voice steady despite his own rising apprehension. "We don't know what we're dealing with." As the light approached, Tso could see that it wasn't a conventional aircraft of any kind. It was a perfect sphere of white light that left no trail, made no sound, and cast no shadow. It stopped approximately 100 yards from their position, hovering silently at an altitude of about 50 feet. For 2 full minutes, it remained stationary, illuminating the desert in an ethereal glow that made the snow-covered landscape appear almost otherworldly. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the light ascended vertically at impossible speed and vanished. The other lights on the mesa simultaneously disappeared, leaving the sky empty and dark. Tso completed his report, noting the time of the encounter as 1:27 a.m. He interviewed the three witnesses, collecting their contact information and detailed statements. When he reviewed his dash camera footage the next day, he discovered something disturbing. While the video clearly showed the lights on the distant mesa, it recorded nothing when the sphere approached their position. The footage showed Tso and the three witnesses looking upward, their faces illuminated by something, but the camera captured only darkness where the sphere should have been. Tso's report was filed as Case 15-1191-02, classified as unexplained aerial phenomena. He never spoke publicly about the incident, though colleagues noted that he began carrying a high-powered camera on all subsequent patrols along Highway 191 just in case the lights returned. It was the night before Halloween in 2013, and KNDN radio station in Shiprock was airing its annual Scary Stories program. Host and station manager Robert Chi had been with the Navajo Nation's oldest radio station for over 20 years. Developing a reputation for his smooth voice and community-focused programming. The special broadcast allowed listeners to call in and share personal encounters with the unexplained, a tradition that had become surprisingly popular over the years. That evening, as Chi fielded calls from across the reservation, he noticed an unusual pattern. Multiple callers were describing similar encounters along Highway 191, specifically in the remote stretch between the communities of Kirtland and Sheep Springs. The stories shared common elements, strange lights, unusual sounds, and encounters with figures that defied conventional explanation. The first call came at 8:47 p.m. from a truck driver who described seeing what appeared to be a group of people walking along the highway in an area where no communities existed. They were just there, in the middle of the road, the man said, his voice strained. I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting them. But when I looked again, they were gone. Chi thanked the caller and moved to the next. But similar reports continued throughout the evening. A woman called to describe a series of strange symbols that had appeared on her windshield while driving home from work, seemingly forming in the condensation without anyone touching the glass. Another caller reported hearing chanting in an unknown language while his car broke down near mile marker 425. though he could see no one in the surrounding darkness. The most disturbing call came at 10:23 p.m. A young man identified only as Michael called in, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm calling from my car," he said. "I'm parked on Highway 191, just past the turnoff to Nagizi. Something's out here." Chi asked for details, and Michael described what he was seeing through his windshield. "There are figures moving in the desert," he said. "They're tall, too tall. They're walking in circles, like they're performing some kind of ceremony." Chi could hear the sound of wind in the background, along with a faint rhythmic chanting that seemed to grow louder as Michael spoke. "They're getting closer to the road," Michael continued, his voice trembling. "I don't think they're human. The way they move, it's not right." Suddenly, Michael gasped. "They've seen me. They're all looking at my car now." Chi tried to keep Michael on the line, asking for more details while simultaneously attempting to trace the call. The chanting grew louder, and Michael began to describe what he was seeing in increasingly panicked tones. "Their faces. They don't have faces," he said. "Just smooth skin where eyes and mouths should be." Then Chi heard something that made the hair on his arm stand up. A tapping sound on Michael's car, as if someone was running their fingers along the metal exterior. "They're surrounding the vehicle," Michael whispered. "I'm locked in, but I don't think that matters." The tapping grew more insistent, moving from the exterior to the windows, as if invisible fingers were tracing patterns on the glass. "They're trying to get in," Michael said, his voice cracking with fear. "I don't know what to do." The call ended abruptly with a loud crash, followed by silence. Chi kept the line open for several minutes, calling Michael's name into the dead air, but there was no response. The next day, Chi contacted the Navajo Nation Police Department to report the disturbing call. Officers searched the area Michael had described, but found no abandoned vehicles, no footprints, and no evidence that anyone had been there. The station's call log showed only a partial number for Michael, with no way to trace it to a specific individual. Chi never learned what happened to the caller, though he received several anonymous calls in the following weeks from people who claimed to have heard similar chanting while driving Highway 191 at night. The Halloween broadcast became KNDN's most talked-about program, with many listeners refusing to drive that stretch of highway after dark. Chi continued to host the annual Scary Stories program, but he never again received a call as disturbing as the one from that October night in 2013. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, especially along the highways that cross ancestral lands, where stories of the unexplained have been told for generations. Highway 191 serves as a modern corridor through ancient territory, a place where the veil between worlds sometimes seems thin enough to pass through. The calls that come across the police dispatchers' radios, the reports filed by maintenance workers, and the recordings preserved by radio hosts all document encounters that defy conventional explanation. These are not campfire stories or urban legends. They are verified accounts from credible witnesses who found themselves confronted by phenomena beyond their understanding. What connects these disparate incidents is not just geography, but a pattern that suggests something deliberate and intelligent at work. The abandoned vehicles with their engines still running, the mysterious lights that move with impossible precision, the figures that appear and vanish without explanation, all point to phenomena that operate according to rules we have yet to comprehend. The Navajo people have long spoken of entities that exist between worlds. But what happens when these ancient encounters intersect with modern technology and law enforcement? The recordings we've examined tonight suggest that something fundamental shifts when the old ways meet the new, when ancient pathways cross modern highways. The silence that follows these encounters is perhaps as telling as the events themselves. Law enforcement, Officers trained to document and explain find themselves filing reports with the simple notation, "Unexplained phenomena." Maintenance workers discover tracks that match no known animal. Radio hosts receive calls that end in sudden silence. These are not stories with neat conclusions or satisfying explanations. They are moments when the ordinary world gives way to something else, leaving witnesses changed and questions that linger long after the events themselves. What becomes clear is that Highway 191 serves as more than just a transportation route. It has become a modern interface between different realities, a place where the impossible becomes documented fact. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The documentation of these encounters helps establish patterns that might one day lead to understanding. Your experiences matter, especially those that seem too strange to share in ordinary conversation. The Midnight Files continues to collect and verify accounts from across America, preserving the evidence that suggests we are not alone, even on the most familiar stretches of highway. What we've explored tonight represents only a fraction of the reports that have come from Highway 191, a road that continues to generate calls and encounters that challenge our understanding of reality. The recordings we've examined will be archived with the thousands of others that document similar encounters across the country. Each report adds to a growing body of evidence that suggests something fundamental about the nature of our world remains unexplored. Highway 191 will continue to carry traffic between communities, but for those who have experienced its strange phenomena, the road represents something more. A boundary between worlds, a place where the impossible becomes possible, and where the ordinary rules of reality sometimes cease to apply. The calls will continue to come across the dispatcher's radios, and the documentation will continue to accumulate, building a case that challenges our understanding of what is possible in the vast, mysterious landscapes of America. Thank you for watching Midnight Files. Until next time, stay safe out there.